what happened the moment Jesus died, was far darker than most people ever hear in church. The earth didn't just shake. Something ancient woke up. And for the first time in history, the barrier between worlds started to break. You're watching the Forbidden Bible, where hidden scriptures, ancient truths, and the mysteries heaven once concealed are brought to light like never before. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon, because what you're about to hear may change the way you see heaven and yourself. When Jesus took his final breath, most people standing there thought the story had ended. A tragic death, a quiet hill, another execution under Roman rule. But according to ancient scriptures, that exact moment was never meant to be quiet at all. Centuries before Jesus was even born, multiple prophets wrote about a series of events that would unfold the instant the Messiah died. Events so specific, so unusual that they couldn't be confused with anything else in history. The problem? Most people today only hear fragments of those prophecies. Pieces, lines taken out of context. And the terrifying part is this: when you put the prophecies together, they form a pattern that activates the very second Jesus' heart stopped beating. The ground reacts, the veil collapses, the underworld breaks, angels descend, walls mean nothing. Nature obeys, crowds witness the impossible. These 7 events didn't just happen, they were triggered, like ancient dominoes finally falling after thousands of years. And here's the forbidden part no one talks about. These 7 signs don't just describe the moment Jesus died. They mirror another set of prophecies describing what will happen right before he returns. That connection is rarely mentioned in sermons, rarely taught in Bible classes, and almost never discussed publicly. But today we're going to walk through each event one by one and look at them the way the early believers did. Not as random miracles, but as signals. Signals that heaven, earth, and the unseen world all responded at the same moment, as if creation itself recognized him. And the first sign began beneath everyone's feet. The first sign didn't come from the sky. It came from beneath their feet. When Jesus breathed his last, the earth responded instantly, not with a distant rumble, but with a violent, rolling shock that tore through Jerusalem like a wave forced upward from the deep. People didn't understand what was happening. Earthquakes weren't common in this region, and when they did occur, they followed predictable fault lines. But this one was different. Historical and geological studies note that the quake described in the Gospels didn't match natural seismic patterns. The ground didn't shift in random breaks. It split in straight, intentional lines, as if something invisible pressed upward from below. Stones cracked cleanly down the center. Columns groaned under pressure. Dust erupted from rooftops. Even Roman soldiers, men trained to stand firm under chaos, lost their footing as the ground lurched sideways in a way they had never experienced. But the most unsettling detail is this: the prophets saw it coming. 1,000 years earlier, David wrote, "The earth quaked and the foundations of the mountains trembled." He connected this shaking to the moment God's wrath or presence touched the world. Amos wrote that darkness and shaking would strike together, a combination so rare that even modern researchers call it theologically intentional. And that's exactly what happened. The ground didn't move because of trapped pressure or shifting plates. It moved because something, or someone, was passing through. This wasn't an earthquake, it was a reaction. A response from creation itself to the death of the one it had been formed through. And as terrifying as that was, the ground wasn't the only thing reacting. Because while stones were splitting apart horizontally, something towering inside the temple was about to be ripped vertically. While the ground was splitting in unnatural, deliberate lines, another fracture was happening. Not in the earth, but in the most sacred place in all of Israel. Inside the temple, a curtain stood as a physical barrier between humanity and the presence of God. But calling it a curtain barely captures what it truly was. 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, thick as a man's hand, woven from layers of blue, purple, scarlet, and gold thread, the kind of craftsmanship only found in royal garments and priestly relics. It wasn't something you could tear. It wasn't something 10 men could tear. By every natural law, it was unbreakable. And yet, in the exact moment Jesus died, witnesses inside the temple heard a sound they had never heard before. A deep, violent rip, like fabric being torn apart by a force far greater than human hands. When the priests turned, they saw the impossible. The great veil had been torn from the top, all the way down to the bottom. Not bottom to top, as a person might do, top to bottom, as if something descending from above had grabbed the highest point and pulled downward with absolute authority. There are several details scholars avoid discussing. 1. No ladder could reach the top of the veil. The height alone made tampering impossible. 2. The veil was too thick to cut without tools, and none were found. 3. The tear was clean, precise like a perfect vertical split. And then there's the forbidden detail. The direction of the tear matches ancient descriptions of divine judgment, a symbolic act only God could perform. To the priests, it wasn't just shocking. It was terrifying. Because if the veil was gone, it meant the separation between God and humanity had been removed permanently. And while the temple shook with fear, something far below, in a realm no living person had ever escaped, was about to break open as well. Because the second the veil tore on earth, a different kind of veil was beginning to tear in the underworld. While the temple veil was being torn on earth, another veil, far older and far darker, was being torn open in a realm no living person had ever escaped. Ancient Hebrew texts describe this realm by many names. Sheol, the pit, the place of silence. But no matter the name, the meaning was the same. A holding place for the dead, divided into regions the living were never meant to see. Unlike the fiery hell most people imagine today, Sheol was more like a vast underground prison, cold, silent, layered. According to early Jewish tradition, there were 3 main sections. 1. The resting place of the righteous, where souls like Abraham, Noah, and David waited in hope. 2. The place of the wicked, a region of torment, darkness, and regret. 3. The great gulf, an uncrossable divide separating the two. For thousands of years, every soul, righteous or wicked, entered this place and stayed there, unable to leave. But the moment Jesus died, everything changed. The Gospels say his spirit descended, not floated, not drifted, descended like someone who had a destination. What happened next is hinted at in verses most churches rarely discuss. The gates that held the righteous for generations didn't gradually open. They shattered. A burst of light described in early Christian writings as a flash that pierced the pit, tore across the silent realm. Souls who had waited for centuries lifted their heads for the first time. Abraham stood. Moses rose. David looked toward the light with recognition, as if the one he had sung about was finally stepping into the darkness. And then the forbidden detail. Death could not hold him, because he didn't enter as a prisoner. He entered as the one with authority. The locks that had never been broken bent like soft metal. Chains dissolved into dust. The prison of the dead, the place no human spirit could conquer, was being split open from the inside out. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a takeover. And what happened in that hidden realm would soon explode into the physical world, beginning with the one place the Romans believed was impossible to penetrate, a sealed tomb guarded by armed soldiers. Above ground, the city was still shaken from the quake. Below ground, the gates of the underworld had just been shattered. But at the tomb, the silent midpoint between both realms, something was approaching that no soldier was trained to face. Roman guards were not ordinary men. They were elite enforcers, selected for discipline, strength, and absolute loyalty. A sealed tomb under Roman authority was considered untouchable. Violating it meant death. The stone blocking Jesus' tomb weighed nearly 2 tons. It had been rolled into a carved groove, sealed with wax, and marked with the Roman imperial emblem, a warning to anyone foolish enough to interfere. The guards expected nothing unusual. Their mission was simple: keep the body inside, keep everyone else outside. But sometime before dawn, everything around them changed. The air grew unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. The temperature dropped, and then a crack of light sliced through the darkness. Not sunlight, not fire. Something else, a presence. The Gospels say, an angel of the Lord descended, but the original Greek implies something even more intense. A sudden arrival, like lightning tearing open the sky. The angel's face shone like lightning, not glowing softly but blazing with a brilliance that human eyes weren't meant to endure. His clothing radiated with a purity brighter than fresh snow, and soldiers who had stared down armies couldn't stand. Their bodies failed before their minds even processed what they were seeing. Weapons slipped from their hands. Knees buckled. Some collapsed backward as the entire garden filled with terrifying brilliance. Then the angel moved toward the stone. He didn't strain. He didn't push with effort. He simply touched what 2 tons of carved rock meant to do: stand in his way. And with a motion that defied every law of weight and force, he rolled the stone aside, not to let Jesus out, but to let the world in. When the light faded, the soldiers saw what should have been impossible. The tomb was already empty. But this was only the beginning, because something else was about to happen. Inside a room no one could enter, behind doors no one could open. While the soldiers collapsed outside the empty tomb, Jesus' followers were doing the opposite of collapsing. They were locking themselves away. Somewhere in Jerusalem, in a small upper room reinforced with heavy beams and barred doors, the disciples hid in silence. They weren't warriors. They weren't trained like the Roman guards. They were ordinary men who had just watched their teacher executed in the most brutal way. And fear had become their prison. The doors were shut. The windows were sealed. Furniture was pushed against the entryway so tightly that not even a desperate stranger could slip inside. Every sound from the street, footsteps, shouting, the distant echo of soldiers, made them flinch. They whispered the same question over and over. Are we next? According to the gospel accounts, no one opened the door. No one knocked. No latch slid loose. No footsteps climbed the stairs. Yet suddenly, he was there, not outside, not approaching, standing in the middle of the room, in the space that had been empty the second before. "Peace be with you," he said. The disciples froze. Some backed into the walls. Others covered their faces, unsure whether they were seeing a spirit or the impossible. And then Jesus did something that shattered every theory that he was only a vision. He showed them his hands. The wounds were still there, visible, real. A locked door couldn't keep him out. Walls couldn't contain him. The physical barriers that controlled every other human being no longer applied to him. But this wasn't only a display of power. It was a pattern, because the next event would happen outside, on open water, where nature itself would obey the resurrected Jesus. And the sign would begin with something deceptively simple, an empty fishing net. The next sign didn't happen in a locked room or in a holy sanctuary or at the entrance of a tomb. It happened on open water, in a place the disciples knew better than anywhere else. After the shock, fear, and confusion of the past days, Peter and several of the others returned to something familiar: fishing. The Sea of Galilee had always been their escape, a place where life made sense, until that morning. They pushed their boat out before sunrise, hoping routine would calm their minds. But hour after hour, cast after cast, their nets came up empty. These weren't amateurs. They had fished these waters since childhood. They knew the feeding patterns, the currents, the depths. But that night the sea gave them nothing. As dawn approached, frustration settled in. The men were exhausted, their arms sore, their clothes soaked, their minds heavy with unanswered questions. Then they saw a figure on the shoreline, a man standing alone, silhouetted against the early light. Too far to recognize, close enough to hear his voice. "Friends," he called out, "haven't you caught anything?" "No," they shouted back. "Throw your net on the right side of the boat," the man answered, "and you will find some." It didn't make sense. If there were fish, they would have caught them already. Still, something in his voice made them obey. They cast the net once more. Instantly, the water churned beneath them. The net tightened, pulling hard, filling with so many fish that the ropes strained to snapping. The impossible had happened. And in that moment of shock, John realized the truth. He turned to Peter and whispered, "It's the Lord." Peter didn't wait. He plunged into the cold water and swam toward the shore, toward the one who had once told him, "Follow me." But this gathering on the shoreline was more than a reunion, because soon the most overwhelming proof of the resurrection would not be given to a handful of fishermen, but to over 500 people at once. What happened next wasn't a private moment. It wasn't a quiet appearance in a locked room or a miracle witnessed by a handful of fishermen. It was public, massive, undeniable. News spread fast across Judea. Travelers whispered it on the roads. Merchants repeated it in marketplaces, and families spoke of it behind closed doors. Someone saw him, then another, and another. And soon a crowd began forming on a hillside. Not priests, not officials, but ordinary men and women from villages miles apart. Some walked through the night. Some carried children. Some came simply because hope, fading since the crucifixion, had suddenly sparked again. By the time the sun climbed over the horizon, more than 500 people were gathered in one place. 500 people who shared nothing in common except one thing. They wanted to know if the rumors were true. They waited, talking in hushed voices, eyes fixed on the horizon, hearts pounding with the uneasy mix of fear and longing. And then it happened. No footsteps approached. No figure climbed the hill. One moment the hillside held only the crowd. And the next moment he was standing before them. The reaction rippled outward like shockwaves. Some fell to their knees. Some cried. Some backed away in disbelief. A few covered their faces, unable to look at what they thought was impossible. But 500 people all saw the same person, at the same time, in the same place. Mass hallucinations don't behave like that. Crowd visions don't stay consistent. 500 eyewitnesses don't describe the same event unless it truly happened. This was the moment early Christians always pointed to. The moment that turned doubters into believers, believers into preachers, and preachers into martyrs. But there was still one man who refused to believe any of it, a man who made it his mission to crush the movement before it spread. His name was Saul of Tarsus. He rode toward Damascus with legal authority to arrest followers of Jesus, with letters permitting him to drag believers back to Jerusalem in chains. To him, everything happening, the empty tomb, the eyewitness accounts, the signs, was nothing more than dangerous religious deception. But on that road, under the full blaze of the Syrian sun, Saul met the one he claimed was dead. A light brighter than the noonday sky drove him to the ground. His horse reared, his companions scattered, and a voice, clearer than thunder, stronger than the quake that split the earth, spoke his name. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" What happened next didn't just change Saul. It changed the entire future of Christianity. And it completed the seventh and final sign that the resurrection had shaken not only earth, but every realm at once. When the dust settled, when the voices faded, and when the witnesses tried to make sense of what they had seen, a strange realization began to surface. These 7 events, the earthquake, the torn veil, the broken underworld, the descending angel, the unlocked room, the impossible catch, and the 500 witnesses, weren't random. They weren't isolated miracles. They formed a pattern. A pattern so deliberate that early believers viewed the resurrection not as one event, but as a series of synchronized signals rippling across every realm of existence. Heaven reacted, earth responded, the underworld broke. Human witnesses confirmed it. 4 realms, 1 moment. And yet there is something far more unsettling. Something rarely mentioned in sermons and almost never addressed openly. This pattern appears twice in Scripture, once at the resurrection, and once in prophecies describing the end of the age, the earth shaking, cosmic signs, angels descending, the barrier between realms breaking, mass witnesses, a global unveiling. It's all there, not hidden, but often ignored because of how intimidating the parallels are. According to the ancient timeline, the 7 signs at Jesus' death were the first movement in a story that is not finished yet, which raises a question the early church wrestled with and theologians still avoid today. If every prophecy about his death was fulfilled with perfect precision, what does that mean for the prophecies that describe his return? The resurrection was not only a victory, it was a warning, a preview of what happens when heaven, earth, and the unseen world align again. And whether the world is ready or not, the pattern is set. The next time these 7 signs appear, it won't be to announce a crucifixion. It will be to announce a return,